types of inlay as far as natural inclusions and things like this that you would see. You'll notice all the stuff that I'm working on. These are currently pieces that are still in the process that because I dabble in these things constantly. I love to do inlay, and the more unusual it is, the better I like it. As far as some pieces, I'll even wait and instead of trying to preserve the piece, I'll intend for it to crack as much as I can get it to split. So I got something to work with that appears natural. If you'd like, you're more than welcome to pass that around. That's just a piece of cherry.
What is the inlay in that?
The inlay in that is natural turquoise that's in that piece. In this, I do prefer, when I do my inlay, to use natural stone. There's a lot of products out there that are much softer, they're much easier, and it changes the job of being multiple days to being, as quick as the glue will dry, that type of thing. This piece has got tiger's eye quartz in it. I will tell you, if you have the desire to do inlay, and it is with natural stone, you're going to want to get online and print you out a copy of it's the Mohs hardness scale, and it will cover everything from steel, normal household goods, but it will also, he has a separate sheet that covers all of your minerals, because you can seriously get yourself into trouble, especially if you decide to buy your minerals. And I was looking for something that would match a gal's countertop. She wanted a bowl with inlay on it to sit on it. So I bought this is green quartz, and it is called aventurine. It looks great. It crunches up nice. And when you buy any kind of gemstones like this, I don't know if I got this turned the right way where you can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. You see right here, it actually will show you what its hardness is. It reads right there, hardness of 7. The Mohs scale goes from 0 to 10. 10 is diamond. Okay, so that being said, and the reason I'm going into this is about the hardest sandpaper that's easy to get a hold of for most of us is silicon carbide, which is just your black, like your wet and dry type paper. If you try to cut that aventurine and you're using just regular quartz paper, that's going backwards. I mean, you're using the piece to wear your paper out because it's not going to cut it. And that was one of the things I found was it was making dust and it was wearing the wood away, and the rock was staying right where it was. So that didn't work out well for me at all. If you cannot change the depth of that, if you put one of your standard carbon tools on, depending on the stone you put in, there's a stone that's called calcite that you can buy. It's relatively inexpensive, and they dye it in basically every common color that guys really like, and you can cut that with a tool, and it will not hurt it. I'm not saying it's going to be, that it won't dull it ever, but let's see. Not near as quickly as some of these. You can buy, if you want to do the mother of pearl inlay, that doesn't have to be costly. I prefer to go down because I like to do large segments of inlay, so I just go down to the river and get my mother of pearl laying on the bank. It is a little bit of a labor of love because you got to grind all that off the back of it with something, and it makes dust that you absolutely do not want to breathe the dust from any of these stones. But you can cut through that pretty easily with a Dremel tool. This is soft. So, I mean, this is all the way down like a 3 on that scale. Okay?
So after you grind off the back, John, what do you do to get the material? The mother of pearl, right? After you grind off the back,
Well, then it looks like this white front all the way through. And when I'm walking the bank, I will look for the bigger shells, and they're fairly thick. And that black stuff on the back of there is thin.
So how do you inlay, do you grind that piece up, or do you inlay?
I will. I will actually take, once I get this cleaned, then I will take and say I want a dove or a spider or whatever it is that I want to inlay. I just draw it on there and I cut it out with a Dremel tool with a little bit on it.
Okay. You crush that up and put it in anything that you've cut already then, or what?
When I'm going to crush it and put it in, I start off with something like this. And you can find this, that whole container is $4, $3.99. You can get this at Michael's. That's without a discount. This is mother of pearl. It said on one of the 2 pounds. So I mean, that will last you from like forever, basically, unless you got a giant project. There are some flakes in here that are big enough to actually make into something. I mean, there's guys that'll use pieces this big in a guitar neck, you know, for the dots or whatever. It's plenty big. It's a little hard to hand shape it once it's that small.
So you're using big shells, you're making shapes out of big shells to inlay.
Big shapes to inlay as a single piece.
You ever try to use the sandblaster to take that black off the back of it?
You can, but
it's not giving you a smooth enough surface to cut.
Right. Okay. I mean, because it's going to be real rough. It's got a lot of ridges on it. This sandpaper is 9 on the hardness scale, the material. Doesn't have to be wet or dry. They do sell it with this material on it that is not wet or dry. The reason I mention that is because it's a lot more flexible. This paper, when you get into the bigger grits, starts getting stiff. It doesn't want to conform quite as much. They also make it on a sponge so that you can use it. Those are pretty slick. The only reason I don't like using that sponge is because it will go and it'll dig down around on the wood on the edge. You can't force it to stay flat. Anytime I'm doing the stonework, I always use something hard behind it so that you're standing right up on that ridge.
Do you always make it proud?
Pardon me?
Is it always naturally proud?
A little bit. As small of an amount as possible, and I'll cover that a little bit more in depth. This is a product that you can get like at Woodcraft or something. It's called Inlays. This particular color, it looks a lot lighter blue. As soon as you get this wet, it looks a lot darker. And so in other words, if I was to inlay this on this bowl, it would be like double this dark once you get the glue around it. So you have to kind of do a little, if you're really particular about your shade, you're going to want to do a little test spot first and see just what your color is really going to be. Super glue on this.
CA then?
Yeah, we'll use CA. I use that for 90% of all of my inlays. There are some cases where, like on that one larger bowl where it just had an inclusion in it that goes all the way through to the back. I still have to pop the back. There's like a part of a branch that's coming out of that. I'm going to pull that piece out completely, but I had to seal the top so the material don't run through first. And once I do that, I will put that under a pressure in the pressure pot when I put that on, and I'll actually use, that'll be a mixture with resin. And just like putting a color in a 2-part resin, you'll mix those granules in it 50-50 to begin with in 1/2. And then when you're ready to go, you've got your piece and you're set. Then you mix your hardener in it and you can put it in, and you've got plenty of time to work with it at that point. But if, like what we're going to do tonight, we'll use CA. I don't know how far we'll get to go with it because it is absolutely a process. It's not something you can do in 10 minutes, because what will happen is I'm going to cut a groove in the top of this with a parting tool, which is what I like to use. And the first layer that we put into it should be your most coarse stone that will fit down in the groove. Okay? If you want to do something that is going to look like more natural stone, like in that inclusion, to my thinking, what you want it to look like is like that. As it grew around stone or whatever, and it was just naturally occurring in the wood. You know, that's the look I like to try to achieve. So the bigger pieces you can get in it, gets that look a lot better. Because what'll happen is after your first go around with it, you're going to have little voids and you're going to have spots where the first time you slick it off, you're going to go, oh, there's a whole piece missing. Well, that's nothing to get excited about. You just drop some pieces in there, and we'll fill that also. The last thing that I would use is, this is basically like sand that has been dyed. It cuts fairly easy. This is still depending on from jar to jar you get, this is like a 5 or a 6, so it's still pretty hard, but it looks good and it stays where you put it, and you'll know what I mean by that in just a minute. The way I prep some of these, you did hear me say that I like to use natural stone, and this is how I get my natural stones. That's Tiger's Eye quartz. This is natural stone. You can get a whole string of these beads. You just have to go and look, because I mean the stock changes almost every day at Michael's. And then the way I get it into something usable, which it will look something like this when I get started. And to get it down to that, now I dumped this all back in one jar. But I started with this little deal that was an idea that I robbed off of YouTube. It's basically just black pipe. Yeah, that's it. Made in China. I like it. You get the first size. I clean the threads up on it some because you want this to screw on and off fairly easily. There will be some rough casting pieces down on the bottom. This is the outer part. This is 1.5 inch pieces out here. I've got a small lathe. It is nothing fancy. I use these smaller, the next size down that will slide inside this pipe. I turned it to where it was just small enough it would barely slide down inside of that pipe, and rounded the end of that to match the inside. So I drop a couple pieces in here. That's it. And you literally, it's heavy enough. You don't have to have a hammer. Sometimes I'll use it. It depends on the stone how hard it is. So you can see, can you get to there? It's all right. That it's already to this point. Now, depending on the size of the groove, you've seen in that the light piece of holly there, that's what's in this. If you really want that to pick up a shimmer, you've got to make that groove has got to be at twice that wide, twice that deep. You want your groove to be symmetrical, as deep as it is wide when you can. If you're really going to jump it out, obviously, to, you want something that's like 1 inch wide, you're obviously not going to be able to do that. You can make it a little deep. But I never go shallower. If it's 1/4 inch wide, I always try to make it at least 1/4 deep. And then I just don't go beyond 1/4 deep for however wide I'm going. And what you'll do is, instead of wasting these little pieces, I will pick out anything that looks like it's the right size. And that's why I say I am pretty painstaking when it comes to the finished product. But you'll take all night cutting on a piece of wood or sanding it to get it just the way you want it. And this is the jewel, this is the crown on what the piece you've made. So why not spend an equal time? So you pick your pieces out that are just the right size when they're this big. Once you have gotten them to that, I couldn't find my sifter that I normally would use for it. I think it fell down behind my bench, and you've been to my shop. It's a little disarray right now. But I will run it through just an old school leftover flour sifter, and that will get it down to about the size what you've seen in this jar. And you have to have what I like to use is 3 sizes, 3 stages of your inlay. You always put your largest piece in first, the largest piece that will actually fit in the groove and not have to stick out too far. I don't care if I have to lay them in there by hand at first, you know, that's fine with me. A few big pieces well placed that sparkle as you turn it are worth the effort to put it in. Once those pieces are glued and set, I will just knock off the high top rough edges, and then I'll go to my next size smaller stone. And then after that's done, repeat that process all the way down to the point where I'm using a paint strainer, catching little pieces where nothing's falling out of here but the powder. That powder still carries that same color, especially when it's wet. And that will fill every little tiny void you have and really will yield a sharp look. It doesn't look like somebody's just, you know, used colored filler and put it in it. To me, it's just a lot higher quality looking job. And you don't have to spend a lot of money to get genuine gemstones either. I will tell you that I keep that stored in my notes as that Mohs scale, because you'll go and you'll say, oh, that looks cool. And it'll be so hard you won't be able to cut it. And you're like, yeah, well, that's too much. That's why nobody wants it.
Sandpaper costs more.
Yeah, exactly. So I look for stuff like this. This was marked down. These were only $1.99. And when you look at the back of the tag, believe it or not, they say what it is. And you watch for stuff that says like this is reconstituted turquoise. So it's natural, but it's like they've crushed it and then they shaped it like they wanted it. You want to watch out for stuff that is not reconstituted, or like on this piece, it just says natural stone. So that's just real turquoise, you know, that it has just been shaped, you know. And you can see the difference what they do with the filler when they're adding to it. You know, there's a big difference in it. The difference you're going to get in the look just depends on kind of what you're after. They do make this where it looks just like either one, but you have to read the tag, because on stuff that's been painted, and believe it or not, they will actually take the time to paint little bitty stones. When you break them, they're white on the inside. So when you crush it, you got a jar full of white plastic or whatever it is. It's no good. But like this stuff here can be found. You can make a lot of inlay just out of one of them. For $1.99, it's well worth it. I mean, you can't buy it by the ounce, even on the internet.
And that's the same color all the way through there, huh, John?
It is. Both of these are. And I really go for I like the stuff that actually has, and there's one that's broke, and you can see it's just a natural stone on the inside that has those natural other formation colors in it. To me, that adds a look of realness to it, you know, when you
Is the reconstituted stuff easier to crush then?
I don't think there's a whole lot of difference in it. It's hard to say. When I whack the thing down on it, it's like I don't notice myself having to like work at it harder. I think maybe you get a more natural looking flakes and breaks from the natural stone that's just been cut. The reconstituted stuff, it tends to turn into a more uniform little broken pieces a little faster. This is not stone at all. They will not tell you what it is, but it must be plastic or something, because that's what it turns like. I have a lot of this. I'd be happy to give y'all a piece of it if you'd like to try to sand it. Good luck. It's really hard. That's all I can tell you. And it breaks up fine. I mean, the machine will crunch it up just fine. This particular unit right here is going to become property of the club, and it'll be just like in the library. Anybody that wants to use this would just be able to check it out, you know, and just take it with them.
Well, it needs a national stock number. We're going to put a club, we need a national stock.
Okay. And the last thing that I use very much at all, and I have bags like this that has brass, and because I do a lot of machine work and fabrication. I have lots of aluminum, so I use some of these flakes. Around Christmas time is when this stuff starts to show up. If anybody ever needs something like this, and I've got it in lots of different sizes, all you gotta do is say, and I'd be happy to give you
Now,
any
how's
that
that
you
aluminum
want.
sand?
Huh?
How well does that aluminum sand?
Super easy. It's really soft. Yeah. That's probably
How about
not,
brass?
that's probably not even a, they both are super easy. They both sand easy.
They polish up pretty good then?
Real good.
Brass.
Yep, it looks bright. The brass powder looks almost as good as like just putting a brass stick in. You have to use a lot of it. The powder I get in a lot smaller quantities, and it's almost like ash when I get it. I mean, it's that fine. So it takes a ton of it. You know, I mean, it takes me forever to get like, you know, a quarter of that baby food jar full. I just don't get a lot of it. But it does work pretty well. This was just a bowl that I was using as a demo when we were at the Collinsville show. Was just a piece of a maple that Terry Eiler had brought up, and I turned it into this little bowl. I always, when I'm going to do something on a rim like this, and I know I'm going to use CA versus an epoxy or a resin for the filler, I always put at least some amount of finish on it. It doesn't have to be 100%, and obviously with this one, I would just whip it on there so that I would have something to do a demo with. But you need something on there to keep the glue and stuff's going to get on everything. And obviously we're going to be sanding on this edge again. So you pre-think that a little bit when it comes to how much material you're leaving on here, because you are going to want to sand it pretty heavily, and you will get into the wood some. And obviously when the first time you see this spin, you're going to know that it's been a while since I played with it. Anyway, on this one, I am going to do, I will probably, this is about 1/8 of an inch parting tool, and I'll probably do about double that on here for this one. First step I'm doing is I'm just gonna, you know, figure out about where I want it, and I'm not one of those guys that likes to mark it and measure it and all that. I look at it and how I like it, it's how it's going. And so we'll go ahead and we'll get that started. I'm assuming it'll stay on there. There's not going to be too close in line there. I did tighten it up some. And of course it's nice and flat. Okay, so we've got a fairly uniform groove in there. That's about what I was looking for on it. I have parting tool. Most of my stuff like this is all homemade. Obviously, that's a 10-inch DeWalt saw blade that I made into that. Works great. You do have to reshape the carbide tip on there just a little bit because, of course, you know, they've got an angle on the carbide. Let's see here. We decided we could get this off of here. At this point, we're going to take it off. I leave it, especially if it's a piece that needs to be nice and true. I leave it on the chuck while I'm doing this work. Number one, it helps to hold it. Let's see, and we decided we were going to put that right there. Use the chuck.
You know, for holding that, I saw a guy, he had a piece of metal turned and threaded 1" 8. And he turned right around and he stuck that right in his tool holder, or his banjo.
Oh, that would be pretty cool. That'd be awesome. If I knew somebody that had an 8 tooth per inch die I could run down, I got plenty of 1 inch.
Well,
I got lots of 1 inch stock.
or you just go to the farm store, buy a bolt, cut the head off.
Oh, yeah, that's
You
true.
know?
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Get that fancy metal laid out and cut the threads. Oh, that's right, it don't cut threads, does it?
Yeah, it does. It cuts threads. You got to be smart enough to know how to make it do that. But it did come with that.
Tubular cannon, just watch that YouTube, he'll tell you how.
Yep.
Well, I spent the whole afternoon trying to figure out how I can make my old Atlas cut Bedford threads. I changed gears on it some, changed out a couple of gears, that was good. Yeah, it took me all afternoon to just let it soak into my head that it would actually work.
Decisions. Well, I guess we'll go with the darker. We'll be able to see it better.
Hey, John, how does that inlays come? Does it come as a rock or a powder?
It's a powder. It comes two ways. It comes as what they call granules, and it comes as nuggets. They both in a little bucket like this, and basically the nuggets are twice this size. So I haven't used it yet, so I chose not to do it, at least not in the granule style. They make a kit that has the resin and a hardener, and it's not like the resin you would get where it's 50-50 mix. It's more like an ounce to 3-4 drops or whatever it is of hardener that goes in it. You stir it up. It's got a not too long of a working time, and they also want you to pre-mix the granules into it, which is, it's just a method that I don't do it that way.
Now, if you only had, I'm just thinking out loud, if all you had was the Inlays rock,
Mm-hmm.
couldn't you just throw that into an old coffee grinder and make your own powder?
They say that you can. The guys will use an old coffee grinder. You know, if you're not going to use it for beans, just an electric grinder. You could put it in there, and it will
Okay.
grind it up littler.
I was trying to think of a way to get it ground up and make it a
Yeah.
fine powder.
Or I have every intention of putting some in that cruncher and just see what happens. It does say that you should use that. It's best to use it in temperatures below 75 degrees. So I don't know if that's because in hot temperatures it becomes softer, you know, and it may tend to bend versus crunch and break. So, but that's something that's on my list of things to use. I bought it because I wanted something I could actually cut with a tool, you know, like when I'm making pins or whatever. But I don't know about that. One of the best tricks that you can do if you're using natural stone and it's more expensive and you don't want to waste it, you want to break up only as much as what you're going to use, because I don't know if you can see it or not, but these jars, most of my jars I have to keep in a box because I don't have the lids to them. and they will get dust, and they get like a little piece of fuzz down in it, and then you got to sit and mess with that stuff. Is not a good way to do it. I need some baby food jars with lids. They just don't make them like they used to. Everything comes in a pouch now. So anyway,
How many you need?
yeah, a dozen would be great. Yeah. Anyway, the one way that they say that you can determine how much you're going to need is just to use table salt, because I mean it's dirt cheap, and you can basically fill this completely up with table salt, and then rake off all your excess, and then dump it onto a paper towel and put it like in a little plastic lid or something, so you can actually see the volume that you have, and just duplicate that so you have the right amount. You're not using too much or too little stone. Basically, what we're going to do is we'll start putting this in all the way around.
Now, are you leaving that crowd right now?
No, not yet. To bring it down to level.
Is that granular you're putting in there now?
Mm-hmm. This is basically blue sand.
What's that product called again?
This is just blue sand. It comes from Michael's. Technical term, it's just blue dyed sand. It is nothing fancy. This product was called Inlays, INLACE, and they've got their own website. It's called inlaysonline.com. They have this at Woodcraft. They're always out of the colors you really want because everybody wants turquoise.
Where'd you get that dyed sand at?
Michael's,
Okay.
which is
I
the
tried turquoise once, and I had the problem that you were talking about where the wood was standing in the way and the turquoise wasn't.
Is the
and part of that can be the problem, can be the sandpaper you're using and not having something hard back behind it. If you're using quartz sandpaper, the only thing it's going to cut is the wood because it can't cut. You'll notice the paper's wearing away, but you won't be really wearing the stone away.
Okay.
And that's the reason
They did put something hard behind it, but it probably, I mean, it's been years ago.
Is that where you got that other sandpaper you were showing us, that was a harder grit or?
No, I bought that at a flea market, believe it or not, because I am the forever cheapskate. And there was a guy selling tools there, and he didn't have nothing but junk tools, but he had a pile of sandpaper for cheap. So I was able to buy 2 big thick cartons of that, of all these different grits. And I think I gave him about $8 for 100 sheets on each grit. I couldn't believe it. I said, "You got any more of that?" And he goes, "Nope, you just bought it all." And he didn't come back the next year, so that's the first guy I looked for.
Is the inlays harder than the sand or vice versa?
Vice versa. The Inlays is not, as close as I could tell, it's not I think it's plastic. I think it's it's like an epoxy or a hard resin.
I've got some thin blanks of the Inlays, and it's actually like it's a powdered stone, and it chips and cuts very, very fast. You stick your tool into it, you stick it in a little bit too fast, you just buzz right through the whole blank. So it's very, very soft material.
Yeah, and that was I think that was their whole selling point, was the fact that you can tool it, without.
You can just use regular high speed, even carbon steel. That's how soft it is, right through it.
Pure turquoise is, they say it's in the 5 to 6.5 range on that hardness scale. Steel and tool steel is only like a 5 to 6. So I mean, if you're using high-speed steel and you stick it in it, it's done. It's the opposite of the sharpening process, literally.
What about carbide?
Dan, do you know how much On the hardness scale, how much harder is the carbide than?
Well, the size of the hardness in the point there is, it's brittle.
Yeah.
So it may chip away your edge.
Yeah.
On the carbide. But I think you'd want to use C2 or C3. You wouldn't want to use C4. I don't think, or C5.
So for the most part, I think the rule is literally going to be, if you can have your workpiece down pretty close to the shape that you want it to be, and get it pretty close to where it's going to be, then this would be the time to finish with sanding. It's not a tooling, you know, there's not much tooling here, unless maybe you're going to use the Inlays. And I mean, to me, the sanding is not that bad if you can keep the piece. When you're using this granulated stuff, it's obviously a little easier to hold it down where it needs to be. I gotta cut the tip off this thing a little further.
So somebody on YouTube that was using a piece of a broken grinding stone to grind it down. That looked like, you know.
And I guessed, I mean, and it was a silicon. I watched that video. It was a silicon carbide.
Green wheel.
Yeah, or some kind of wheel.
Well, for my carbide, that's all I ever use for on the metal lathe anyway, is what's called a green wheel, and it's green color. And it's probably, I don't know, an 80 grit or something. And I might touch it up with a little bit of diamond stone.
Well, they make those CDN goes, I wonder what they, don't they make stones for that too? I mean, you got sharpening stones, or you can use that.
Gamma cemetery. Got a Gamma cemetery road, right on the curve. Yeah.
Well, of course,
Yeah.
the original tips that came on these bottles, it fit much better. I use these little micro tips that I've got, you buy them in a whole sack full. It goes on the end of your bottle. I should have brought my old bottle because it fit perfect on it. Super glue I get in the big bottles. These tips are great applicators because you're not just getting it everywhere. You know, you can really need to try to keep it confined just to the spot where it's going to be. And this will, I'll probably get to glue my fingers to the bottle here. So we're just gonna.
Did you say this was thin or medium?
This is thin. I've seen guys on these discs or in the videos where they like to use the thick but I try to get as much fill as possible.
So you're trying to get the glue on this first pass all the way up to the rim?
No, it's going to soak in because you got raw wood. You just cut that hole. It's going to soak. This is just basically gluing the initial layer of stone into the hole, and it's going to make it stay. And the only time I have used less glue on this first pass is if I have had to paint the inside of that groove to begin with. There are some colors of stone that are relatively opaque, and when you order it in, as with most gemstones, they don't necessarily always come the color that you want it because it varies. And there's been times when I'll have to paint that groove white or paint the groove blue, at least down in the very bottom of the groove, because it does let a pretty fair amount of light pass through this, a lot more than you would think. I do like to do wire inlay as well. I've been recently using the straight little sticks of brass, and that's mostly just because I like to do those kind of a symmetrical kind of patterns and stuff like that on them. I've been interested in trying to do book boxes, you know, Bible boxes and stuff like that, trying to create heirloom type stuff. And stuff is beautiful. Craig had said something, I think it might have been even before Christmas, that he was wanting to try, what was that, that lead-free solder or something that their guys are using for filler.
Plumber solder.
Okay, now if you noticed, I didn't actually let the drop always is falling into that sand. There's something about that if the drop is hanging on to the end of the bottle and it hasn't turned loose, it wants to pick sand up or whatever you have in there, it will try to pick it up. And now all of a sudden you've got it like that piece instantly wants to hang on to the end of the tube. So I always try to be close. And now you can see that at this point it's just a waiting game. You know, it's going to take it a minute to wait. And what I may do is, I still ended up with it on my finger, because what's in here now, I don't want to fill a lot higher with that size granule. There'll be enough in there for that to sparkle. There's a couple of little tricks you can do if you really want that to pop. At Walmart, you can buy, it's cheap in their craft department, and I mean, the sky's the limit to when you start getting into casting and doing these inlays and stuff. You get a whole assortment of different sizes of glitter or sizes and colors like this. So I mean, you could actually pick through and put just like a little tiny sprinkle of maybe that clear or that darker green, and we'll take just a little bit of this blue sand and we'll put it in the bottom of that masher, and we'll mash that all up together and create even a finer powder, and then that's what we will finish off over the top of that with.
And do you ever use accelerator, or you always go natural?
I don't, because I don't want the stuff to move around, and maybe it would stay still, but I've never found it where I could control it real well, you know, how hard it's blowing on it. So I've always just stayed away from it for lack of, you know, and one guy warned of it turning white, especially if your bowl isn't 100% dry. That's the only other warning I could give too, is the drier the piece is, the more successful all your inlays will be. The other thing I wanted to mention is if you want to do inlay on cocobolo, walnut, some of the darker, more exotic woods that have a lot of oils in them, you need to take that, dip like a toothbrush, and actually scrub and swab out the groove first, or there's a pretty good chance that over time it will turn loose.
Swabbing out with what?
I use acetone on mine.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I think a guy, you could use the denatured alcohol, I think would work.
If you do another wallet one, try it, do it actually boilable.
Yeah.
It will boil out some of that oil.
Yeah.
And it turns different, it's different.
And that may be a really good way to do that too, on that.
I notice a difference in my bowls whether I air dry them or if I boil them in that walnut.
You set it to boil units? You set it to boil units?
He's got a big witch's temple in the back
Yeah.
Cauldron. It's got the cauldron there.
What?
The cauldron.
Yeah.
It looks like an
It does.
You don't ever want to go around back and not know what he did. You can find it out.
There's not many cats in this neighborhood either, so.
There's no cats in our neighborhood.
course, you can count the houses on like one hand, getting into your place.
Yeah, you probably could do that.
You got enough coyotes and hoot owls around there, the cats won't stay.
That's right. Okay, so I just picked up a little bit of that out of the bottom of there. Anybody have any questions at all? I mean, I know there's probably little detail stuff that I am leaving out because
That's all right, they got the vendors list, they call you.
I've never done a demo.
So if you were to just finish this with that straight sand,
Mhm.
would it still come out smooth and stuff because?
It's going to look polished. Yeah, the sand it'll cut and it will look shiny. I mean, it will polish just like a piece of glass would polish, you know. And I tried to do some research to find out what is sand made of. And the short answer is whatever is left over from whatever it's like the remnants of whatever that's left. So it could be hard quartz, it could be soft, it could be whatever. They're not real picky about it. And I think what I want to do is put a little, make a little.
How hard do you reckon that silicone sand is that they mine there in Peter?
The same as what we're putting in that bowl. Tip, or whatever they call that.
So the reason you're crushed this far is so it gets farther in?
It is. The roughness that's on the surface of here now is because the granules are going to be a little bigger. So if you don't want to build it up a lot more proud than what it is, what this does for me is because it's so even, it's not really giving you a fair look at what
The gaps around the
it is.
grains.
It's exactly what it is. This would be, you will understand it without even an explanation when you start putting in stuff like this. And all of a sudden, you know what I'm saying, you're going to have big voids, and the first time you turn it over and shake the dust out of it, when you're done and you knock it down, you're like, wow, I can still see wood. So then you're like, it's always a good idea to stick, and you can see off of this piece, this was just some leftover. I had a little job that I was doing, and this was literally what was left over. And I thought, you know what? I'm not scraping it in the trash. I'm just going to stick it on that little piece of that pin blank, and we're just going to let it go. So I ground it down slick and then ran it over the buffer real quick. And you can see the different colors. I mean, there was even a piece of, I don't even know what that red is that's in there, but it really does make a difference when you can fill, because you can see in this piece how much resin is around it, or epoxy. And to me it's just real sparse, but this was just leftover, just what I had, and I'm like throwing it at it, versus when it's tight, And it also gives you an opportunity. There's nothing saying that you can't take a tiny slice of wood and put you some dividers every so often in here and fill it and just make that be. It can be, you can change that and alternate blue, white, or whatever you're, and just do it that way. I guess it helps put the end I've been hammering on don't go in there too good anymore. When you start doing natural turquoise, you will have to put the hammer to it. It's got a lot of hammer marks on it. It's a lot harder material, but the look is so much better. It's worth the work. I have, and there's a lot of quartz out there. Literally about 1,000 different kinds of quartz. They're all in the middle of that scale. None really go above 7. And that's kind of my rule of thumb, depending on how hard you want to work. being that the sandpaper is literally a 9, as long as you stay in that, below 9 on that hardness scale, there's a couple of them that look super cool when you inlay it. Hematite, the little shiny black looking coal black stone, that stuff looks really neat when it's inlaid. I mean, it looks, especially when you have that mixed in with some other colors like the bright red stone. There's a couple of them out there. It's easy to use. Try not to waste too much of this here. And you can see, I hope you can see, is that close enough, Craig? How much more fine that is than the original. Is that focused enough? Yeah?
Hey, John, is that color, is that light fast?
It's on this sand now. It's the first time I've used this particular color, so I'm not sure. I've never had any of it fade. It seems like it really holds up well. They have bright red, and this is one of them things where you never know what color they're going to have available until you get there, Just depends on what somebody was trying to decorate with, I guess, what they left you. You're talking about like for something that would sit in a windowsill?
Well, anything for display, it's subject to UV.
Yeah. That's a good question that I do not know the 100% answer to. I can tell you that anything that's only the direct surface of this is going to be the only thing that would be exposed to anything at all. So, and I doubt, as deep and rich as this color is down deep in it, if it would have really a dramatic effect, even if it did fade some. If it was me, I would just be calling that a design opportunity. I like to use a business card for this, but I gave away my last business card to a guy.
Yeah.
So I'm building this up at this go around with this level. We'll leave it a little proud because this will be the layer that we're going to sand off and see what voids are left. when I'm doing this in my shop, typically I'll try to do 2 or 3 things at once, because I would do this. I always work in the evenings anyway, after I've got my normal day done, and I would go through and do 2 or 3, and then I'll come back and I'll let this set overnight before I sand on it, because I like it to be nice and hard. Come on. These little applicators, if you want to get into anything that's where you're using super glue where it needs to be accurate, they're super handy. Try and keep from gluing my fingers together, but it was figured that tonight I would have it sticking.
What an accelerator is good for is when you get that stuff on your fingers, just spray your fingers with it, and they don't stick together.
Oh, is that right?
The accelerator,
Yeah.
you get the super glue or the seed glue on your fingers, spray your fingers with the accelerator, and they won't stick together anymore.
I've always used acetone.
Yeah, but if you're in the middle of something, you just
Yeah, that's true. That is true. It's not quite enough left in there to even work with.
That's a good thing, man.
So would that be your last application of stone in that?
That's the last one of the stone.
Ron?
And at this point, you're just waiting for it to flash over, put it back on the lathe, and start sanding. And that's it.
You've been a member for a while, haven't you? Or-
Yeah, I was gone for a long time.
So you shouldn't have any voids for the super.
Correct. The larger the pieces on that natural stone, you're gonna have some, I mean, you're just gonna have some pits. And that's the reason I will start off with one layer. And then as I'm getting rid of those pits, I never try to just do clear fills. I always try to, on the last one, if I'm using, especially with the mother of pearl, I may put, if you have a pit, I may put a dot so that it's wet, and then actually sprinkle the powder over the top and let it go in. But the mother of pearl will sand off almost as quickly as the wood will. So it's not near as ignorant when it comes to getting rid of it later. You know, so I don't mind if I have a little bit, you know, going like that. But at least this way, I've kept the CA mostly in the groove. I try to not, you know, have streaks running down in the bowl, because, you know, and you know, they're just hard to get out of there. The CA is so hard. And this is
John, I got a question. just thought of it, aquarium, rock
Mm-hmm.
or sand. What is that made of? Is
It-
it something soft?
It is, and it actually works well, but a lot of it is, it's either painted or dyed, so you have to watch. You can actually get this, you can get that tiger's eye quartz, you can get that is in a big sack full of aquarium gravel, and as much as I love how that looks, just be ready for it being tough. It's hard. That's a 7. It's one of the harder of the quartz. So I mean, it sands difficult, you know. You just have to be more careful with it. You know, it's not a thing where you can be in a hurry, you know, when it comes to sanding on rocks, basically.
Have you used a file at all?
No, because even tool steel, I mean, depends on where it's at. Got to look at that. You got to look at that scale. If you're doing something, I mean, the file may cut it, but it's going to be full. You know, as soon as then all of a sudden now you got a file that's full of something that you can't get rid of. You know, be stuck in it with super glue and the hard stone.
Got my mind working here. What about a grill brick? How hard is a grill brick?
Not very.
So that wouldn't work on that stone.
The grill brick would be about 2.
Yeah, it's real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you tried, when you're sanding that, have you tried using a powered sander?
Yes. In my estimation, I know it can be done, but they're difficult for me to control. You know, keeping it where I tend to, you know, move around too much, and it seems like it's getting on the, you know, I'm to the point I'll bring the tool rest over, and and a lot of times I'll take that paper literally, and use spray on adhesive, and I'll spray it to the end of like a paint stir stick or something, you know. So it's solid, and not only that, but it's easy for me to control it, you know. I can really actually watch and see what's touching.
I wonder if you could use a grinder dressing stone.
Like a diamond stone.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that would cut. I don't know if it would be aggressive enough, but it would definitely be hard enough. If it'll cut a grinding wheel, it should dress that. Diamonds at the top of the list. So.
I don't know how smooth you get though.
About a diamond card.
Yeah, no, there.
Yeah. But at this point, I mean, I don't want to paint the picture like, you know, you'll be there all night long sanding it. But the worst thing that can happen is if you don't have any patience, then you better use inlays. Because if you get wore out on stuff pretty quick, it's just the finished product of real stone, you know.
Have you ever tried, I saw a guy do this, and he cut his groove wider, but he actually bought sheets, those like Michaels or something, really thin sheets of copper.
Mm-hmm.
He took and cut those off in little tiny pieces, put those in there, and then put the glue on top. But he didn't add any more. He just sprinkled it all in there to start with, and that was cool looking because each piece reflected light completely different.
Yeah,
That
it does that when if I'm going to use that aluminum like that, I'll cut the groove much larger, and that instead of using CA, I'll use clear resin, you know, like yeah, and it doesn't disturb how anything is laying, you know, so you've got every different angle, and it really.
Any problems with bubbles?
No, not with pressure pot.
No.
Yeah, just put it in about 80 psi, then bubbles are history. It doesn't make them disappear, but it squeezes them so small they don't matter. That's basically how those work, you know. And it depends if you have the long set resins that take like 48 hours, they'll stay like completely liquid for hours. You can put those in, and I'll pull it a vacuum on it, you know, 30 inches of vacuum for 3-4 hours sometimes. and then you gotta take the lid off, and you may have to pop a bubble or two, because it will pull all the bubbles to the top, you know. Sometimes it's a process where I will, if it's an important piece it's really worth fooling with, I'll apply pressure to it. And I've got two different ones. If it's a small piece, it's got a big clear lid I can put over the top of the whole thing, and I can watch it. When it starts getting too bubbly, I'll let the pressure off of it and just let it settle for a while, and then I'll pull it again. Because I mean, it literally, there's some woods I've put in there, it'll foam the resin, and there's so much foam in it, it's not.
Pulling the air out of the wood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it will too, right through the groove that you cut, it'll suck the air right out of that wood, big time.
John, have you tried a product called white diamonds?
For doing what? What is it for?
It's
The only white diamond I ever used was like a stick on a buffer. I got stuff called white diamond for that.
No, it's a new type of illuminate that's out, and it's supposed to be extremely clear and have very, very few properties of creating bubbles.
That's all I use is and there's a couple other brands out there that I'm sure probably work just as well. In fact, I got a gallon kit ordered now. I'm going to try some new stuff because it's less than half the price. You know,
Have you tried West?
That's acrylic or epoxy.
How much longer before you be sand this first layer?
I don't know.
Don't glue your finger
It's getting pretty close. It feels pretty, it's feeling pretty firm. I just don't want a chunk to blow out after I got done on this stuff. What do you think?
I just want to look at it.
It feels pretty
Closer.
hard.
Where are you going to get that special sandpaper from if you don't have it already? We're going to come over to your house and get it? No, I'm talking about us. Let me see that.
So is that sandpaper?
And this is what is this again? What you said you got this at the swap meet?
It's silicon carbide.
Okay.
It says on the back what the hardness is on the paper.
No, but silicon carbide is what the material that's on the front,
Okay.
and that is listed on the Mohs scale.
Okay.
Because it has a listing for all your abrasives too. Yeah, you can
That's
put
fine.
in this MOHS, which is the Mohs scale, and he will. I mean, you can look up Mohs abrasive hardness, Mohs mineral hardness, Mohs steel hardness. I mean, it's like got it for all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
So if somebody wanted that, they'd have to search the internet to find some.
Oh, you can go down to Buckeyes and get it. They got it there.
Oh, do it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just because it don't have to be black either. It can be like this stuff here. Where's it? This. Same thing.
Huh.
Just got sticky on the back for my DA.
Mm-hmm.
So you know I'm a huge cheater. Yeah. I get that because it's cheap too. I told you I was cheap.
So basically, when you get done, you're sanding down, like you put the big chips in here, you're going to sand down some of this wood then and expose the tops of them big chips is what you're saying then, or
when
what?
you're using natural stone and you got your first layer in there, I'm going to let it dry completely.
Mm-hmm.
Put it on the lathe, and when I put the first piece of hard paper on it, this is 80 grit. First time I put it on there, all I'm doing is trying to knock the tops off to where I can see if I've got any voids, you know, any little spots that are still open. If it still looks good, and I'm starting to get pretty close to the wood, you're starting to see scratches come up on the wood, then I may move down to the next finer paper until I start, because I mean, I don't care how good you think you've got that, when you finally get it where it's pretty slick, you're going to see some little bubbles or pits or something where you're going to need to put a little powder in it. Or if it's literally just micro size, but sometimes you won't see it until you're all the way to the final when you're trying to polish it.
What I'm getting at is how did you wind up exposing these pieces here like this? That was sanded down, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's all it is.
Because I like that look.
Yeah, that is epoxy.
Yeah, so that's gonna make a difference.
Yep.
Pass that around.
So we do the
Yeah.
easy thing.
Well, and here's the trick though. If you don't have a way to hold, if your sander is like, if you're just gonna hold it with your fingers, you're gonna ask for trouble, especially with it, when the thing that's holding the stone is softer than the stone. The CA is pretty hard, you know, when it sands. So, I mean, that's why I like it when I'm using this, is for that reason, you know, so.
But you'd get the same effect if you had larger stones in there than that sand. Because then you put the smaller stuff in and it just fills in around the bigger stuff.
You would actually get there's ways of varying it, just like in any other type of casting or resin work that you're gonna do. Like in with that piece that's getting passed around, you can actually use, if you want to use a resin or an epoxy, you can use a 5-minute epoxy if you're quick. You can put a few big pieces in, and I mean, you can't see the seam in it where you've started and stopped. So I mean, you can actually start on this and you can work on an inch-wide spot and get all the pieces, the big pieces in. And if you got a piece that when you turn it, that thing is really catching the light and flashing, then why would you want to cover that up? You know what I'm saying? That's a spot where I might just go ahead and fill that area with clear so I can, you know, let it pick up that flash. Sounds pretty hard.
Fall asleep on this already. Okay.
Has it ever out here?
What I like, what, not yet. No, I can, maybe we had time to go down and look at it.
Mine's going south in about a week.
Got having a little metal card in there.
What about Portland guys?
Well, I guess that would work. Helps to have a bowl that's not making you jump off of it.
When you're sanding that.
If it was a bowl that was flat enough that would tolerate it, I would just probably 800-900 on the stone. But then when you get ready to when you start touching on the wood, you probably need to back it back down to, you know, in the 500 range. Breaking my own rule, I don't have my respirator with me. I don't like breathing either one of them, the stone or the CA, either one. The only thing I'm doing when you see me rub that wheel like that is occasionally all I'm doing is kind of dragging the dust off of it so I can actually keep an eye on my wood. And that gives me a chance to kind of feel, you know, about how much more I got to go. And you can see, even with that hardness being that much more, that'll kind of tell you what you're working with. I can feel the sand is coming down some. And you can see how fast it's coming down. It's actually not too bad. But that's for 80 grit, you can feel how much smoother it's made that paper already too. Considering it started off like that. So I mean, it's a fairly hard material, and if you got it start touching on that wood, it's gonna, and this is why you don't want to have it too high. It's like This is exactly the same procedure I use when I'm trying to mud drywall, you know. Put on too much and then stand there and sand it all back off. Instead of just putting on what I needed in the first place. That's exactly how I do it. Guys, I got an uncle that did it for years. The drives him crazy. He goes, why you put that much on? He goes, you're just going to stand there and sand it all back off. I said, well, you could always do that for me. He said, then how would you learn? There's not many products like the Yorkshire grit, and I am a huge fan of Yorkshire grit for wood. But when you're using it on this material, it ain't gonna do much. Because I don't know what they use for the abrasive in it, but it's not real hard. We're getting close. We're almost to the wood.
Yeah, you can get it anytime. I'll just sit down.
I start with 80 grit and just run that up through. If you're doing stonework like this, typically I will go all the way up through about 600. Works pretty well.
So you're saying after you sand all this down, you still may have to put more in there yet? Because you'll get voids and stuff.
That's true. And you'll be able to see them here in just a moment. Usually when I drop, once I get into the 200, generally that will start showing you, it'll get slick enough you can actually spot them. Because the CA drops all the way into the bottom, you know what I'm saying? It falls to the bottom of your groove initially. If you don't want that to happen and if you want to use a thick CA or a medium and you want it to fill your void quicker, that's a personal choice that you can do that and it will work. However, you can see it, and you don't get the opportunity for that powder to fall in around the other stones.
Is there a lot of heat being created from that sanding?
Yeah, if you put your finger on it, it gets pretty hot right where that stone's at.
That just breaks down the CA.
Yeah, and that's why I keep moving, and I'll give it a break. And I mean, I'm able to put my finger on it, and you see me. That's why I turn the speeds back down now. I mean, it's pretty low, and I'm just about to the point now where I think I'm about ready to, where I've got it flat. I think I can leave it soft, put my finger on it without getting carried away on the wood, to where I can see what I've got to work with here. And now you can see what's left. If you want to walk up and take a look, you can see what's left of those voids. That aired hose, you see it, we still need to sand a little lower right here where you can see it's out on the edge. But this is about where you want it to be. When you should be able to put your final coat but you wouldn't want to put any final finish over that with the white on there. You want to take your blowgun and blow that out of there first. Before you would put
So that white is actually dust in there?
It's dust.
Oh, so
Yeah.
it should be a solid uniform.
So you want to blow that out of it, huh?
So could you just fill this then with CA as a buildup?
You can. I mean, this material is so dense, it's so uniform to begin with, it's not really any kind of an issue, At this point, if I wanted to put some kind of a finish on it, that I could use for a finish.
That's excellent.
But that's a permanent stone finish that's in there.
That's nice.
And when you put your final finish on it, all the little white will disappear out of it, And you can see every once in a while a little pickup. You can see them little sparkles from that last batch I put in there. That wasn't in the original stone. And that's sometimes just that little subtle hint.
So that is this stuff right here that you got from the craft supplies at
Michael's.
Michael's.
Yep. I mean, and this was like $3 for that whole can. It's back where they got netting and starfishes and seashells, and you can get a jar like that's just full of regular little bitty seashells or something. And I'm like, it was $2.99 for that 2-pound jar of mother of pearl. That's crazy. And you can bust that stuff up and put it in here, and it looks awesome.
You think a little
Especially
coffee
walnut.
grinder would grind that stuff up? That mother of pearl?
Haven't tried it. It's real soft. That's only a 3. I mean, it's only
Little coffee
that's only
grinders
2
are
spots
brutal.
above talc. I mean, so it's not real tough. And you can take a regular shell. And I do like these